Hello, welcome to this edition of the UK Run Chat podcast. Today, I'm joined by Doug Richards, who is the author of 3 books. His latest book, Once Around the Planet, is now out, and I'm looking forward to chatting to him about it. Hi, Doug. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Michelle. No problem at all.
How are you today?
Yeah, pretty good, thank you. Not too bad at all.
Yeah, brilliant. So, do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, first of all?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm 75 now. 75 years old now. I didn't start running until I was in my sort of early to mid 30s. I hated running at school, but since then I've had an amazing life through running. I've travelled all around the world to lots of exotic places. I've run on every continent, um, and I continue to enjoy it, albeit a lot slower these days as I grow older, and maybe the distances I can run aren't quite as long as I used to be able to. But that, yeah, that basically is a little bit about me.
So what prompted you to start running, Doug? If you disliked it at school, what was that light bulb moment that made you think,
Well,
yes, I want to get out
it
there and
was
try it?
indeed a light bulb moment. My son Chris was 4 at the time, and I was at home watching television one evening when he had a nightmare upstairs, and I ran up the stairs to pacify him. And by the time I got to the top of the stairs, I was out of breath. And I
Right.
could
Okay.
hardly breathe. And it was actually the year of the very first London Marathon, and it was
Wow.
a light bulb moment. I just thought, look, I need to do something about my fitness, and so I decided that the following morning I would get up and go out and run 1 mile round the block. And I did. I got up next morning. I ran the mile. It nearly killed me. I went back to bed afterwards. Um, and that was just the beginning.
Yeah. So what was your first race you did then? Did you get into racing early, or did you just kind of do some running day
I,
to
I,
day
I
at
just
first?
for about 18 months, I just gradually increased the distances. I didn't actually sort of enter any races. I mean, around that, it was 1981. It was the first year of the first London Marathon. And really, that there weren't really that many races around. The running boom had
Yeah.
really was only just beginning to take off. So my first race, which was about 18 months after that first 1 mile, was actually a trail marathon, and that was I lived in Sussex at the time, so it
Yeah.
was called the Seven Sisters Marathon. It's now called the Beachy Head Marathon.
Oh,
Um,
that's a very tough one, I believe. Very
it is
hilly.
indeed. I mean, at the time I ran it, it was held in February, so we had snow and ice to contend with. It is
Wow.
now run in October, so that was quite a hard one for my first ever race. But as I say, there weren't many road races around at that time anyway.
No. Oh, you certainly know how to challenge yourself, Doug. Just thinking, picking that as your first race. Wow. So yeah, I'm almost finished reading your first book. Sorry, your third book, Once Around the Planet. I'm really, really enjoying it. I mean,
Lovely,
running has
thank you.
taken you to some very, very special and exotic places, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has indeed. I mean, I've been lucky, um, in that I've travelled all around the world. Really, I've run at least a half marathon on all 7 continents, and running has just given me the most amazing life. Really, so I've had some great experiences.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your newest book, then.
Okay, well, once around the planet, I from the very first day, from that very first 1 mile run, I suppose I'm a bit of a geek, but I've always kept a record of my runs. I kept a record, how far I've run, how long it took me, etc. Now, initially back in 1981, that was all done in an exercise book, pen on
Yeah.
paper. Um, but eventually that sort of became transposed onto an Excel spreadsheet, and I've kept that spreadsheet going over all these years. Um,
Yeah.
and so I knew about a year ago that I was fast approaching 24,902 miles in total, which is the distance around the equator of the planet. So that's where the actual title of the book comes from, because I completed that in October of last year at my
Yeah.
local park run. So I have achieved the running distance of once around the planet.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
fantastic.
so the
And it,
book itself, sort of the end of the second book, which was called "Can We Run with You, Grandfather?" I can maybe talk to you about that later, about where that title came from. The end of that second book culminated in a half marathon in Antarctica, and that
yeah.
completed my seven continents challenge. So, always looking, what can I do next? I decided I would do a series of races on islands, on various islands, and so once around the planet describes the races in the Azores, on Cyprus, even in Venice, which the city itself is on an island, and where I
Yes,
ran
it is, isn't it?
the
Yeah.
full marathon distance. Um, and I also went out to a really exotic island, which is Easter Island in the middle of the Pacific, and ran a half marathon on there. So a lot of the stories in Once Around the Planet relate to running on islands. Also, Bermuda was another one. There are a number of events, multi-day events on these islands where you run on consecutive days for maybe 3 or 4 days. So a lot of these events were multi-day runs, some on road, some on trail, also a huge variety of different running surfaces and places to visit.
Yeah, that's got to be tough. There was one instance in the book where you were talking about running up the side of, was it the side of a volcano crater? That sounded very tough.
That's right. That was one of the races in the Azores, and that
Yeah.
quite possibly was the toughest half marathon I've ever done. It really was tough work, but the view from the top was just incredible. Um, the crater itself is filled with a lake, and there's I don't know who decided to, but somebody's actually decided that inside the crater would be a good place to put a village, and there's a little village that lives in this huge crater, and there's a road that crosses the center of it, and one side of the water is bright blue and the other side is green. And it's an incredible sight. It's probably due to different sediments, volcanic sediments underneath the water.
Yeah. Wow, it sounds an amazing place to run. Um, I mean, the idea of doing multiple races on consecutive days as well. I mean, that's tough in itself. But I guess when you're traveling out somewhere far away like that, you want to make the most of your time there, don't you?
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, if I travel a long way to do a race, I don't just want to run a race and come home again. Um, Part of the fun I've had during all my running travels is actually not only the running itself, but all the associated sightseeing, meeting the local people, enjoying their customs and everything. It just all part of the running experience. The race is just sort of part of each one.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. Where you were talking about visiting Easter Island, and they put on like an opening ceremony, didn't they, for the race, where you got to see a lot of the dancing that they would do. That sounded
Absolutely. Uh,
fascinating.
yeah, I mean Easter Island was a totally fascinating place. It's just about one of the most remote islands in the whole world, and there's
Yeah,
so much controversy over. It's famous for its huge stone statues, the moai,
of
which are
course.
like
Yeah,
gigantic rock heads, which are carved out of volcanic rock. But yeah, even the experts, even today, still disagree about who actually made them and why they made and what they represent. And even more, how they actually managed to move them around the island, because each one weighs about 90 tons, and we're talking
Yeah.
about sort of 400 or 500 years ago.
Yeah, wow. So, I mean, how difficult is it to get to these places? I take it you don't organise a lot of the trips yourself. You use a tour organizer, don't you?
Yeah, tour organisers for the
Mm.
vast majority of them. The Venice Marathon was different. We just a group of us just had made our
Yeah.
own arrangements and met out there. But these sort of other island races, I use tour organisers to actually get out there.
Yeah, and is that a relatively simple process? I'm speaking as somebody who's never done a race abroad, and the thought of going abroad and having all the logistics to sort out just
Yeah, I
scares me a
think
little bit, to be honest.
I mean, there are a number of UK companies. 209 Events is one which is run by Mike Grattan, who was a former winner of the London Marathon. And there are, a number of companies, Sports Tours International, and then there's an American company called Marathon Tours, which I've used extensively, who now have a sort of UK agent, and they will sort of book all the hotels and things for you. You just have to sort of sort your flight out to get to the start line, basically.
Yeah, yeah. Although they're not always without mishap, are they? There were a few that you mentioned where there've
No.
been mix-ups of hotels and things in your book.
Yes, indeed. No
I
things.
guess nothing's ever perfect, is it?
Yeah, up until then, everything was going according to plan. But certainly Easter Island and the Azores, there was sort of mix up at the last minutes. But hey,
Yeah,
this happens. This happens. And it didn't affect any of the it didn't affect the running at all, or the enjoyment of
no,
the trip at all.
yeah. So where did the idea to run on islands come from? Because you'd obviously completed races on all seven continents. Was islands just the next natural step? Do you like having a kind of theme to your challenges like
Yeah,
that?
I suppose I just like having a theme, and I had run previously. The Cyprus event is held over 4 days, and I'd run it a few years ago. And to be honest, it's very unusual for me to go back. I like to do a run somewhere, but then find somewhere different next
Yeah.
time. But I did enjoy it. The Cyprus event is in November, and it's nice to have a bit of warm sunshine to run in November. I really enjoyed it a few years ago, and one of my running friends at home was quite keen to actually have a go at it himself. So in the end, we decided we'd go out there together, and run it together. So
Yeah.
yes, so that was Cyprus, and having done that and knowing that Venice is on an island, and I was intending to run a marathon. I wanted to run a full marathon after I reached the age of 70,
Wow.
um,
Yeah.
and Venice was a good place to do it. So the year before, I had to abandon it because of a bit of an injury, but the following year I went out there and ran the Venice Marathon. So
Mhm.
yes, it islands just sort of gradually built up, and then the Azores came up, and then Bermuda. So Ireland became a theme.
Yeah. Let's go back to Venice Marathon for a moment then. So you were originally intending to run it the year it flooded, weren't you? Venice had a huge flood that year, didn't it? And I
That's
think, did you
right.
still end
I
up
think
running the 10K?
yes, I had to go out there. I went out there the year before. I'd entered the marathon, but I picked up a late calf injury, and
Yeah.
so we went out. I went out there with my son and his family, um, and my son actually ran the 10K. I just did the one, not local, nearby park run while I was out there.
Yeah.
But while we were there on that year, Venice had the worst floods it's had in decades, and so we spent a very interesting few days wading around everywhere in water and sitting in restaurants with water lapping around our knees. It's amazing how they just carry on regardless. And
Yeah, I
then
guess that's not the first time it's happened, is it?
no, indeed, but this was just particularly bad. But then I went out there with a group of friends the following year, and
Yeah.
happily the waters remained a more reasonable level, and
Yeah,
then I
good.
did manage to finish the marathon that I wanted to do after I reached the age of 70.
So how was that experience? How different is it running a marathon in your 70s?
Um, Obviously slower. Um, I ran with a good friend of mine, a lady called Julie, is a close running friend of mine who's considerably younger, um, but is very, very supportive. And she sort of kept pointing out photographers to me and other sites because I tend to just look at the road in front of me
Yeah.
and just plough on. But together, we agreed at the start we'd run it together, and we did. We finished it together. Um, yes, it was slower, and there were a few walking breaks and everything. But then, I've walked during most of my marathons at some
Yeah.
stage or other, and it was just good to be out there with a good lot of friends around us.
Yeah, I'm sure it's an incredible achievement at any age, isn't it? A marathon.
Yes, yeah, and I being realistic, I think probably that will be the last full marathon I do. Yeah, I'll struggle a bit more these days with the endurance side of things. I still love running, but shorter distances, I think.
Yeah, yeah. We'll come on to that in a little bit. I just wanted to ask briefly because you've run in your book. You talk about running a marathon distance of parkrun courses as well, and I just wanted to ask what's your experience of covering the marathon distance in a day with multiple breaks as opposed to doing a marathon in one go? Is it very different?
It's incredibly different. This was something organised by a local friend of ours, which involved running eight and a half or eight adult parkrun courses and a junior parkrun course, all in one day. Now, obviously, we did it on a Saturday, but obviously, only one of those could be official.
Yeah,
So we selected eight different park run courses, and happily the volunteers at each of those park run courses agreed to sort of stay behind and mark out the course for us. So we
yeah,
ran eight different 5K races, which made the 40K, and then at one of the races we ran their junior park run route, which made up the 42K. Um, you have to travel in between each one on a coach, and
yeah,
obviously, the seating conditions are quite cramped. So, although each individual run was not too long in distance, you tend to seize up quite a lot in between. And so, to actually cover the whole lot within one day, within one Saturday, we started at 7:30 in the morning for the first one and finished about 7:30 in the evening for the final one. Um, I think actually it felt harder to me than running a marathon in
yeah,
one go.
yeah. I think stopping and starting, like you say, when you seize up must be
It's
tough.
yeah, particularly once you've got to about 4 or 5 and you start to stiffen up and you sit on the coach and you're trying to sort of stretch out a little bit to ease the aches and pains. It gets progressively harder. So it was a very interesting challenge, but one I enjoyed doing.
Yeah. So you were talking obviously about endurance getting more difficult as you age.
Yes.
Um, so you're sticking to half marathons now. Is that your maximum distance?
I think half marathon would be the maximum. I mean,
Yeah,
we could talk about. I think COVID and lockdown has had quite an impact on me personally,
yeah.
and so endurance is more difficult for me these days. Um, I'm pretty sure I can get round a half marathon, but I don't think I'll be doing any further marathons.
No, they do take a lot out of you, don't they?
Yes, I think it's the training as much as anything. I
Yeah.
mean, the event itself, with something like the Venice Marathon, I mean, the crowds, the scenery, etc., carries you through it, but it's the sort of hours and hours of training you need to put in beforehand to give yourself the best chance of completing it.
Yeah, yeah. And those long runs, they always feel tough, don't they?
They do indeed, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, apart from endurance, have you had to make any other adaptations to your running as you've aged, or it's clear to see that you're still running at the age of 75. So it is possible. Is age just a number, or are there things that we need to change and be more
I mean,
mindful of?
obviously, you slow down. Yeah, various things happen to you. I tend to get more cramps as I've grown
Yeah.
older, so I always have to, even for short runs, I wear sort of compression socks to sort of try and reduce the cramps. Um, but yeah, apart from the loss of speed, eyesight, my eyesight deteriorated. I talk about it in the book. It's quite an interesting story, really, because I ran for many years in wearing varifocal lenses, and
Yeah.
around 2018-19, around the time leading up to the Venice Marathon, I had a number of falls while I was running. Um, that I think it happened about 8 times in a year. Not most of them were just cuts and grazes to the elbows and knees, and you just get up, brush yourself off, and carry on again. But then I was running with a group of friends on a trail run, and I had quite a big fall and really hit my head very hard.
Yeah.
Um, and this sort of ended up in the back of an ambulance and in A&E. But one of the things that came out of that was that I stopped wearing glasses for my running. Um,
Okay.
uh, I reason that with the varifocal lenses, because one minute you're looking towards the what's in the distance, and then you're looking at where your feet are going to land. Yeah, my eyesight
Yeah.
was just not adjusting properly, and so because my
Okay.
distance vision was okay, I decided to stop wearing varifocal lenses, and that was about 3 years ago, and I haven't tripped over since.
Oh wow, that's incredible. So that's helped.
So that's really helped me. So yeah, so now I don't, I just rely on my distance vision.
Yeah. Oh well, that's good that you've not had any more falls.
Yes, no, I'm doing much better these days.
Yeah, I actually fell over this week running for the first time ever. I think I've never fallen over.
Oh,
It's quite a
really?
shock, isn't it, when you suddenly find yourself on the floor?
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's the same. Most of them, you just stop your Garmin watch and
Yeah,
brush yourself down, and then carry on again.
yeah. I mean, what about injuries? You mentioned you had a calf injury that stopped you doing Venice. Have you noticed more injuries as you've
Um,
aged, or have you had many over the years?
Over the years, I've been incredibly lucky. Um, I had a bit of knee problem at a time, but then I went to see a podiatrist, and he put some inserts into my running shoes, and the knee problems never recurred. I must say that just recently, the last 6 or 7 weeks, I haven't been able to run because of an Achilles
Oh
tendonitis
dear.
problem. And this is the first time I've ever suffered from it. Um,
Yeah.
Happily, yeah, I'm working with my physio, and happily, I'm just beginning to get back into a little bit of run walking now, and it certainly seems to be going. But it certainly made me, not being able to run for 6 or 7 weeks makes you realise how important it is for your mental well-being. I mean, it is for me. It's been awful not being able to run.
Oh, I'm sure as someone who's run for that, for most of the life, I guess that is very tough to deal with. That I think that brings us on quite nicely to something else I wanted to chat about, really, about mental health and running. And you write quite candidly in your book about the anxiety that you've suffered throughout your life. I mean, just tell us a little bit about that and how running fits in there.
Yes, well, I've for most of my adult life, I've had periods of quite bad anxiety, and at times depression. And on occasions, it's become so bad that I've had to sort of take medication for it. I've had various sort of therapies to help me cope with it. But the one thing that helps more than anything else is just going for a run. And
Yeah.
sometimes when your mind is really cluttered and all sorts of things are going on through your head, just getting outside into the fresh air and just going for a run and listening to the birds singing, it just sort of seems to clarify your thoughts, and what seemed like an insurmountable problem when you were sat indoors, you can suddenly find solutions as you go out. So I've sort of occasionally have relapses of this anxiety and depression. As I said earlier, I think the COVID pandemic and the isolation because I live on
Yeah.
my own um, hit me quite hard. And the last couple of years have been quite difficult for me. But the one thing that I know will actually help me get through a bad day is just to go out, even for a 20 or 30 minute run. I know that will sort of help me immensely.
Yeah, running is incredible like that, isn't it? I don't know how it works, but it does. I think just getting yourself out of an environment and moving, it does seem to just clear
Yes, I
your
mean,
head and
I've in my working life, I did lot of work within medicine and medical research, and certainly, running is known to increase some of the brain chemicals, the endorphins, which sort of give you a more peaceful outlook. So, it certainly helps me, and as I say, I'm very sort of quite open about talking about my anxiety problems, and I
yeah.
know that that has helped a lot of other people who also suffer from the same problems. And if you know someone else is going through it, it's so much easier to relate to. So
Oh,
running has been
absolutely.
fantastic for me.
Yeah, I mean, what about doing the racing, especially the racing abroad? I do have a bit of anxiety around racing, especially in big groups, and it's more to do. I think it's more to do with getting there, and just the thought of being around a lot of people and where do I go and where do I park, and there's all these thoughts rushing through your head.
Oh,
I mean, does
absolutely.
does anxiety come into play when you're planning these big trips? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, a lot of the trips I get really quite anxious before. Um, I know I did a race in Greenland on the polar ice cap, and I had really bad anxiety leading up to it. So it is quite difficult. But I suppose I'm just a sort of quite an anxious person anyway. I mean, I even get a few butterflies in my tummy when I turn up at park run, and I've done
Yeah.
hundreds of those. um, but yes, usually I get over it. I mean, I don't know. In the latter chapters of the new book, a couple of events didn't go according to plan because of the anxiety issues, which
Yeah.
I say I think are really related to the lockdown and everything. So there are times, when things didn't go where the anxiety won in the end. Um, but even then, when you might feel a failure at the time, but then you learn from each of those experiences, and each of what seemed like a failure can actually open up another opportunity that you didn't know was there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it, actually. So, I mean, so your last running trip was it Bermuda, wasn't it?
Yes, the
Um,
last
I mean,
one I did three races in Bermuda, um, but then I went to Prague to run a half marathon there, and because of anxiety issues, I basically didn't make it to the start line.
yeah,
Um, and then there was another race in Iceland, another one of my islands that I planned to do, but again, the anxiety got the better of me. But it's still on my agenda.
yeah,
I'm
okay.
planning to go out there and do it next year.
So, what's happened instead? Then you talked about it opening other opportunities. Where has that led you? That decision not to do those two races?
It's just other opportunities in running. I mean, I
Mm.
was lucky enough to be nominated to carry the Queen's baton during the Commonwealth Games in the lead up to the Commonwealth Games,
Oh,
and that
wow.
was just an absolutely amazing experience of actually being able to to carry a baton around, um, and then of course you know it, I do a lot of talks about my um, runs. I've given talks, anything from sort of primary school children, um, senior school, colleges, running clubs. I've even given a talk in an open prison to the prisoners.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
so all of these things sort of open up, new avenues. It's not just about putting the shoes on and running. That there are lots of other ways that I can use my experiences to, if you like, inspire other people. All of these things not only help me, but help
Yeah.
other people as well. And I've recently I run a lot of couch to 5K courses for our local council. And I recently had a lovely lady who was over 80 years old who's never run before, and she completed the couch to 5K. And it was just fantastic to see her face at the end of it.
Oh, that is lovely. It just shows that you're never too old to start, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. No, and it's really great that you're inspiring people. It made me chuckle in the book. You said, I think you said, the when you give talks to the children, the most frequently asked question is, "What animals have you seen on your travels?"
That's right. The animals I
Yeah.
had. This was documented in my first book called Running Hot and Cold, but I did a half marathon race in a game reserve in South Africa, which was a fantastic experience. But a couple of days before the race itself, a group of us were out on foot with some rangers, looking for animal footprints, and we were ambushed by six elephants,
Oh, wow.
and we were chased down into a ravine by six elephants. So that was an animal encounter that I
Oh,
will
my
never
goodness.
forget, I must say.
Yeah.
Happily, it all ended, okay for both us and the elephants. The rangers did carry a rifle and they sort of fired it into the air, and that was enough to put the elephants off. But they got to within about 20 yards of us. So,
Wow. That heart-stopping moment, I can imagine.
absolutely. And another amazing animal experience I had was in Antarctica. Again, not during the race, but we were actually in a dinghy, which is maybe 10 or 12 feet long,
Yeah.
and two humpback whales, which each 40 feet long, literally came alongside us and just entertained us for about 20 minutes, just rolling over and blowing out of their spouts and making all sorts of noises. It was just incredible. I mean, they could so easily have just tipped us into the icy water, but they didn't. They
That
just
must have been
entertained us.
incredible.
It's just, I should never forget moments like that.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think has been your favourite moment from all the places you've been to and the races you've done? Have you
Oh,
got
so
a
so
standout
many, so
moment?
many of them. I mean, a lot of them are
Yeah.
the animal moments.
Yeah.
I think one of the one that always tugs a bit of my heartstrings, I must say, is I mentioned earlier the title of my second book, which was "Can We Run with You, Grandfather?" And that
Yes.
came from an experience I had in Sri Lanka. I did a series. This was a series of 11 races on consecutive days in different parts of Sri Lanka, um, and it took place in 2005. And if you remember, on in 2004 on Boxing Day, there was this terrible tsunami in that
Yeah.
part of the world, and thousands of people lost their lives. And at first, we just thought that the trip to Sri Lanka would have to be cancelled, but that's not what the local people wanted. They wanted us to come out there. So in the end, we did go out to Sri Lanka just a few weeks after the tsunami. And of course, it was a very emotional trip. But one of the stages was a half marathon, the first half of which was entirely uphill, going up the side of this tea plantation on the side of a mountain. And when I got to the top of this hill, at the halfway point, there were six children there standing by the roadside. And one of them called out to me, "Can we run with you, grandfather?"
Right.
And I said, "Yes, of course." And so they joined me, and we started. Obviously, this was at the top of the hill, so we started to run down the other side. And the road was sort of winding backwards and forwards down through these tea plantations. And at every bend, there were more children, and they all gradually joined in with me. And by the time I got down to the village, the first village, I had about 40 children, and we were singing "Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man." And it was just such a magical moment that I'll never forget. Particularly at a time which was, so emotional for the country as a whole. It was just wonderful to hear those children laughing and singing.
Yeah, how wonderful. That's just given me goosebumps, Doug, as you've recounted that.
Oh,
That you felt a bit like the Pied Piper.
it's exactly how I felt, and I must say I've got goosebumps even talking about it. It still brings that memory back. It was a fantastic moment.
Yeah. Is there anywhere that you'd like to go back and visit that you feel you've not seen enough of, or is there anywhere new you're
As I
really
say,
wanting
mostly
to?
when I do overseas races, I tend to try and do a different one each time. Um, I, I mean, if I did go back somewhere, I'd love to go back to
Yeah.
Antarctica, because that was just an incredible. It's almost like visiting a different planet. Um, it's just so different to anywhere else in the world, and it was just such a magical time with not only the whales that came and entertained us, but all the other wildlife, the seals and the thousands of penguins and everything. It was just an amazing experience.
Yeah, describe for us what it's like in Antarctica. I think most of us will never really get that opportunity to visit. How did you
Yeah,
arrive? It was by boat, wasn't it?
yes, it's quite a journey to get out there. I mean, I ran the half marathon there, and the half marathon takes place on King George Island, which is just off the Antarctic Peninsula. So to get there, I had to first of all fly to Buenos Aires in Argentina. Um, then another flight down to Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city in the world, and it's right on the very tip of South America. And then we went on this Russian boat, which took us across the Southern Ocean and the Drake Passage, which are actually the roughest seas in the world, because it's the only part of the planet where it's completely sea encircling it. There's no land masses there to actually break the waves up, so it's very, very rough. And we travelled on this Russian research ship, which held about 100 people on board. It wasn't like a big liner or anything, a big cruise ship. It was quite a small boat. So the sea journeys themselves were, an adventure both there and back. And then, of course, once you get off the off King George Island, and once you get to Antarctica, there aren't any harbours or anything where the ship can tie up. It just has to drop anchor in the middle of the water, and then as I mentioned earlier with the whale experience, we climb into these dinghies with outboard motors, and that is where they can actually take you ashore. And once you're ashore, then that's when we ran the half marathon.
So where
Um,
did you stay on Antarctica? What was the accommodation?
oh, the accommodation was on board the
Mm.
ship. We just
Oh,
slept on board.
so you literally just went
Yeah, you
onto
just
the
go
boat to
on.
kind of run. Yeah.
You go
Okay.
on to the land just to do the run, and to
Yeah.
do a few sort of experiences of walking on there and visiting various coves, etc. But you actually stay you sleep on the ship itself
Yeah.
and just go backwards and forwards on the dinghies. We're in Antarctica for about 4 days,
Right.
but just absolute, it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah, so that's one you'd like to repeat then. You must have better sea legs than I do.
I was quite worried about the sea journeys, I must say, but a lot of people were very ill, but I was quite lucky. I was given, I went to my doctors to ask for advice, and he gave me some patches to put behind my ears,
Yeah.
and they worked really well. So I actually wasn't too bad at all. There were 1 or 2 days when it was really, really rough, when you couldn't necessarily eat your dinner.
Oh dear.
And they certainly wouldn't serve soup up in the canteen.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe sorry, that's my dog barking.
That's all right.
I believe that's where the saying 3 square meals a day comes from, isn't it? It's from needing square
Yes, I
plates on
believe
ships
so.
that are in
Yes,
stormy
that's
seas.
right. I mean, the food on board the ship was actually very good. I mean, the ship had a Russian crew, and the cooks tended to be the sort of female partners of the Russian crew, and that they
Yeah.
looked after us very, very well, and it was just an amazing experience.
Yeah, that sounds really just truly incredible. Um, so tell us a little bit about the running friends you've made, Doug, over the years. Because, sorry, I'm just going to pause there a minute and I'm just going to sort the dog
Yeah.
out and I'll tell Joe to edit this bit out. Just 1 second.
Okay. No worries.
Sorry, Doug, I'm back. I
No problem.
apologise. Right, where were we?
Running friends.
That's right. So in the book, you describe a lot of the people that you've met on your travels that you've made some really good friendships with. Tell us a little bit about that. You know, running really brings us together, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. I mean, every trip I've made, I think I'm still in touch with at least a few people on that trip. And of course, on occasions, you meet them at subsequent events as well, because once you get hooked onto this sort of running travel, people tend to book lots of future events together again. I think in particular, um, the group of us who were chased by the elephants in South Africa, um, many of those are in New Zealand, were from New Zealand, and some from
Mm.
America. And I've certainly kept in very close contact with them. And a few years ago, I went to Australia, um, to run a race in the Australian outback. And as part of that visit, I made the trip over to New Zealand and have a reunion. We even managed to find a 10K to run together with some of the friends who'd run away from the elephants with me. Um, I've also remained very close to the people I travelled to Antarctica with, because
Yeah.
obviously, because you're sort of all confined together on board of what is a small ship, you spend an awful lot of time together. So that's another sort of group of friends who I've been particularly close to. But as I say, yeah, I think every event I've ever run, I'm still in touch with somebody. And of course, social media these days just makes it so easy to keep in touch with people and to share each of our, what we're up to at any one time.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I think there's just something about running, and when you find somebody that enjoys it as much as you just want to kind of hang on to them, don't you? And
Oh,
somebody who
absolutely
truly
right.
understands our passion for it.
No, no. I mean, maybe non-runners don't understand, but yeah, it is a shared experience, and so many friends. The friends I've made some fabulous friends when I went out to Easter Island, and we still um, meet up, and hopefully we'll be meeting up again next year. So
Fantastic.
it's great to have friends from all around the world.
Yeah. So, what have you got planned next? Anything exciting coming up for you?
Well, I'd say at the moment I'm being a little bit cautious because this Achilles problem has sort of set me back a bit, but hopefully that's now slowly beginning to resolve. I
Yeah,
think for the remainder of this year, I'm sort of targeting just a few local races. I won't do anything, but I would certainly like to go back to the Iceland trip, another one of my island trips that I wasn't able to do last year. So that's sort of a long term goal. Um, other, I'm quite eager to get to my 500 park runs as well, and I should be able to do that in about a year's time.
that's a lot of park runs. Where are you up to at the moment?
I think it's 444.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, yeah, that probably will take about a year, won't it?
Yes, a year. Hopefully in about a year's time, I'll be able to get that blue 500 park run vest.
Fantastic. Do you tend to do the same one, or do you like moving about, doing a bit of
I
tourism?
mostly do the same one. I do the Arrow Valley one, which is the one
Mm.
in Redditch. So I mostly do that, but I've done quite a lot of touristing, and I've done it when I went to Australia. I did park runs in Sydney and in Brisbane, and indeed both times I went to Venice. The first time when it flooded, and the second time when I ran the marathon. There's a park run in Padua, which it's quite a trip out of Venice, but
Yeah,
it's just a wonderful little park run because there's only about 30 people do it,
yeah,
and at the end of it, the sort of marshals open up the little cafe in the park. It's called Butterfly Park in the English translation of it, and it's just is so typical of what parkrun is all about. Just such a friendly little group of people. So I enjoyed that twice, and for a short period of time, I actually held the age category record for it, but that's since been taken off me.
oh, and sadly, it's a bit far away to go and get it back quickly, I
No, I
guess.
can't. Yes, yeah.
Oh, well done though.
Oh, thank you.
Well, it's been lovely chatting to you today, Doug. And your book, I'm really enjoying it. I've got about a third of it left to read, but it's brilliant. Do you want to tell our listeners where they can get hold of it?
Yeah, well, it's actually published officially on Monday, this coming Monday. So it can be pre-ordered from Amazon or any good bookshops, Waterstones or whatever will have it in stock. So it's called Once Around the Planet, and it's, as you say, it's the final part of my running trilogy.
But hopefully not the end of your running.
Not at all. No, I
Not at
should
all.
definitely keep on for as long as I possibly can because it is just so good for me and just
Yeah.
you know gives me the boost that I need at times.
Yeah, no, it's clear that you are very passionate about running, and that comes through strongly in your book. So
Oh,
all
thank
the
you.
best with your coming adventures.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you.